Okay, for just a moment now, or I've gotten it apart, or removed split the body shells, pulled out the barrel. But just quick before diving into starting our modifications here, wanted to quick show you the inside of the limited one. And yes, I know this is a little bit of showing off because I don't know of any in the market still anymore, but just to take a moment to appreciate the machining and as well as the engineering that went into removing all the material that they managed to do from this receiver. If you compare it, they're literally only keeping the parts here and here that allow the barrel to be clamped, and back here it's where the bolt goes through, and just the bits to hold your trigger bar lever here, and just enough around the monopod slot. And just for a little proof concept here, it's still the same thread. So they've done so much excellent work, and all the slots here, the machining is beveled, and they carefully went around and sunk in here, but kept it so that all the trademarks here are still visible, but keeping it in the design in an aesthetically pleasing pattern. And even up top here, cutting in that little divot or pocket there and removing all the material between the rails. This thing is really light. It lost something like, I don't remember how much it is over the original one, but they've certainly done an amazing job of doing it while maintaining all the core functionality and everything that you need for strength. In real steel, I don't know if this would be as effective. They could probably do it to an extent, but I'm not sure with how the housings and stuff worked if they could go quite as aggressive. But it's overall really beautiful and really well done. And even the trigger unit here has been minimized. See, this is pretty much a big old brick, and here they've removed it down to pretty much the absolute bare minimum that it can be. And even the trigger itself is sort of a bit of a minimized trigger. I kind of like this profile a bit more than this one, but it still has all the full adjustment that the I guess the full-blown SRSs do. The cheaper Sportline ones, I know you can't adjust this as much in the trigger department, but absolutely a stunning piece of machining. And then the underneath here is where it has the which number of the limited edition it is, as well as I think it's silverback lightweight engraved in there. But so that aside, well, and to continue on, the barrel here, this is super deep fluting. Here's the notch that locks the barrel in there. It's fluted pretty much all the way up to where the hop-up screws would be, so that's removing a lot of weight there, but still being, a solid piece of metal, and it still clamps in nice. And then a carbon fiber suppressor. Overall, very, very aesthetically pleasing, as well as very functional in terms of reducing weight while not giving up on the strength of the materials. So excellent job there. Okay, little rant and comparison aside, back to the task at hand. We can relatively take and set all this stuff aside. Here's the spring guide and stuff. We'll be replacing that later, but our task number one here is going to be modifying both of our side panels to match and to accept our odd regulator block shape here. So comparing it, you can see, I don't know if I have a marker handy. I'll probably go find one to sort of do our markup. You see right here we have, the big ribs that were originally to hold our monopod here and lock it into place. That fits in there like a glove. So to anybody wanting to put a monopod on the lightweight, yeah, it's easy. Just take it apart and screw it into the receiver. You're good to go. So we're going to have to remove these fins here, go in here, as well as up here. If we look, that's pretty much sized for this smaller diameter, and we have a much larger diameter piece here. This is actually a pretty big thread. It doesn't look so much that way, but it is. And then we'll also have to remove these sections here. And it's important to note on, I guess would be the right side panel of the gun here. This is going to be a very tricky spot. This is the cutout for where your mag catch goes, or your mag release for the right side. The button's on the left side. But this here, this corner here, is pretty much going to get obliterated to the point where it almost breaches through. So this is the only light spot you can see in here. It's that sort of white line. It isn't actually through, but it's just at the cusp of it. And that's all the farther you need to go. If you go in much further, I guess it'll be covered up, but that's the only particularly cautious weak spot, and it sits right tight in there. So that is a necessary point to do. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of sort of trial and error, remove, test fit, try and figure out where it's binding, line it up with the pieces, keep on cycling that. So I won't bore you with the entire grinding bit. I might go and include some of that, but it wasn't my plan to have you sit through 2 hours straight of Dremling, screwing, unscrewing, or even bothering to like time-lapse that or anything. I'll probably just check in along a few points to show you things, or sort of key things that I'd think would be a key point or a key thing to note. And yeah, I'll get to that and follow up with you guys in a bit. And then once we have this all fit up, then we can go through setting up and fitting in the Minecraft engine, as well as the calculations for matching the barrel volume there. Like I said, this is sort of going to be a bit of an all-inclusive video. I might do a separate one regarding barrel and or hop-up setup, because I'm going to be playing around with, let's say, the Max Model hop-up unit, maybe the Maple Leaf hop-up unit, the Fast hop-up unit, and the stock hop-up unit. So there's a bunch of good options there, and I'm probably going to end up using the Max Model one whenever that shows up. Will probably be my first one to test, but let's get into it, and I'll follow up with you guys in a bit. So just to show you quick bit of at least how I prepped it up. So I copied over some of the markings I had on the other one of approximately like where that ring's going to sit. I'm going to need a bigger area in here, and about where the fatter part of the reg sits. So I need to remove that. Also need to pull out pretty much all the way from right here through about here. Of all this stuff needs to go. I got it clamped in the soft jaws of my vise, or with the soft jaw inserts. It's a bit of an awkward piece to hold. Other thing that you should remember too when working with this stuff, wear like a face mask or a respirator, or work in a well-ventilated area so you don't get the plastic or the dust. Always wear safety glasses so you don't get this stuff in your eyes. I might actually go in and clean up some of this other stuff too, but yeah. So I'm just gonna basically just start going to town with my saw blade here and slowly chew away at the plastic bits until I get things to fit. And I'll follow up with any tips or tricks or anything that I note along the way here for you. Okay, so the battery died in the previous portion of this clip, so I'm not 100% positive where it stopped. So I'm going to just briefly revisit what I went over previously and just give you a quick update on the progress. So here I have gotten it so it fits nicely so that, you know, when our screws come in, we aren't really going to have any gapping in the body. So this is definitively sort of a lot of trial and error here. I kept on just going back and forth, sort of setting the body halves back together around it, squeezing it together, looking from the backside, looking sort of from as many angles to try and get an idea of where things may have been binding, and then I'd remove one side. Then, you know, look around on the one side to find, oh yeah, it's in here by this knurled nut that I need to remove some more material. And so ended up sort of this, and you can kind of see here I went through with a Sharpie pen, you know, marked the regions. So once again, to recap, we hollowed out a bit here where we have the thicker part of the regulator, a lot where we have this knurled nut. That is going to be sort of the thinnest part of your body right there. We need to make sure there's enough room around where the monopod connects up here. That's another sort of common binding point. And then down here as well. So that's what I did. And as far as the technique, so again, I was using my little saw blade here. If it decides to focus. This is a fairly aggressive bit. And I think the same thing if you try using a cutoff wheel. Basically, your technique is you're going to just barely touch it to the plastic and slowly drag it along the surface that you're trying to cut your bevel into. So with it running, you know, you're just barely touching and drawing it along. So each pass you're removing just barely any material. And that helps keep things controlled, because otherwise, you know, if you start going to town, you end up cutting a bunch of grooves, and it'll be harder to keep your surface smooth as you go. Alternatively, you know, you could sit here with some coarse sanding drums, or maybe it's some of the larger ones designed for drills. I don't have any of those on hand, but that would also work fairly well. And then obviously you'd have to do a little bit more work in there, but not the most terrible thing. So that is all set now. And in this case, I did have to notch the regulator here ever so slightly, right there, because that's where this bolt here goes. And if you look at this, we've had to remove some material on the side, so it starts cutting into there. So in order for that bolt to still go through, I needed to just dust the edge there, and this is not really a pressure or air seal component or part down there, so I wasn't too worried. So at this point, realistically, I think the heavy stock modifications are done, and I think I might call this maybe like a part 1 or part A. And then we can sort of move on to part 2, which will be installing and setting up the Minecraft setup there, and going over how to do that and how to volume it. So this is sort of a bit of a all-encompassing SRS, both the modification and the install of the SDIK, and maybe even a couple of other things like putting in spacers here to allow your mags to drop free easier or to fall out easier. So one other thing to touch on. So you need to use a minimum of 2 pads before the butt pad. And as far as some of the bits that I use when hollowing this out, but at this point I'm not intending to use or to modify another one at this point. I used, to an extent, I used the rotozip bit, or your sort of plunge cut bit, and that'll help cut out some massive areas. I did still use my saw bit you know, to basically, you know, make my incisions here to get a lot of that cleaned out. I also did use these like carbide cutting bits. See if you want to focus. So they just have sort of like the edges cut into them. And that helps, especially on this one, carve out there. As well as nothing also beats, once you get the area cut out, a nice hand file. I particularly like this Half Moon that I own. Come on, focus. Why isn't autofocus working? There we go. This to put the chamfers and the bevels on the edges here. So on the first layer, you really need to bevel the edges almost all the way, because we have this curved piece here sticking out, so we need to be able for that to sit around there. And I also had to remove it here enough so that I could come down far enough without hitting the body of the regulator, so it could engage in the locks. And then the second one, because we have this, this is basically my stack of adapters. So 1032T, 1032 to 530 seconds, quick disconnect, 1032 extension piece, and 1032 bleed valve. And here you need to basically hollow out almost the full length of it, because this will sit in like here, and we need room for the hose to come out the top side, and so that you can hit the button on the bottom side. And then I think we'll sort of do that part in the final assembly, but basically we're going to use a grub screw through the back of here. That will just lock this in place so it can't slide down. And then a grub screw through this guy that will lock it in place in relation with these X's on the back here, so that number 2 can't slide down. And the butt plate itself, we'll use yet another grub screw, probably in the side here of number 2, that'll just lock that in place as well. So not as quick of detach method, but it will hold it secure, and in general, when you don't have to change springs or anything like that, you shouldn't have to be going in there a lot. But that's sort of a brief summary of how that goes all together. So now we'll clean up, and I'll set up for part 2, and we can go over sort of the cleanup setup of the Minecraft SDIK.